And then as we prayed about Israel, the whole city, the whole region there is being shaken physically as well as spiritually. Ukraine, Russia, countries at war. Our world is shaking, and there's a lot of trouble and trial and difficulty. And this theme, or this word, the unshakable city, comes at the end of the text. And I apologize that I don't have an overhead, because I haven't been home this week, and I haven't got a Chinese translation because Richard's away on holiday, and I didn't have anything to send it to him. So I really apologize. So I'll have the text on the screen, which you can follow as I go. And as I said last week, when Evan spoke, I wish I'd had the first part of the chapter, because when you come to the beginning of this chapter, you find it starts with a warning, and then there are other warnings, and the end of the chapter is also a warning. And I thought, why for a people who have been really shaken? These Hebrews had been desperately shaken. They were shaken by persecution. The world was troubled. They had been rejected by their peers. They had lost the wonders of the Hebrew Jewish faith, because they had come to Jesus and they were told, you've got nothing. What have you got? You've lost everything. You've lost the temple. You've lost the covenants. And they had been disciplined by God, because that's the previous part of this chapter. And you say, warnings. Why are these warnings? Because there are two warnings, one at the beginning, one at the end. And then there's another little couplet that comes immediately after the first warning, and it talks about the attitude that we have to warnings or to God. And then it presents us two alternatives, two ways that we can choose to live. How will we live in the light of what God has said? And of course, at the end, there are two ultimate choices. What are you going to choose? What are you going to choose? Are you going to accept God and his word, or will you refuse him? So the first of the warnings starts with the words, look after each other, see to it that none of you fall short of the grace of God. And you say, how could you fall short of God's grace? Could you fall short of God's grace? I am to look after you, look after each other, he's saying. This is not just look after yourself, look after each other, to be sure that you don't miss out on God's grace. I puzzled over that for some time. How can you miss out on God's grace? And what do we do? How do we look after each other in this? So they said, you must watch out. And then the other warning is at the end. So what do you think about warnings? What do you do about warnings? When you see a 50 sign on the road, it's a warning. What do you do about it? Does you say, it's just a suggestion to me? Up in Mangawhai, we get a tsunami warning twice a year. When we change the clocks, we get a warning. The tsunami siren goes to tell us that this is what it's going to be like. At the very recent one, it came when Jean was in church. I was at home on Zoom, but Jean was at church. She said, we didn't hear it because everyone was singing so loud, we didn't even hear the tsunami warning. But we had one 2 years ago when it was apparently a real one. There'd been an earthquake on the Kermadec shelf, and we were told, go for the hills. And the police were driving around, making sure everybody got out of their house. And it was a false warning, and there was no tsunami. And we had to go up in the hills, and people were parked in their cars for hours until they said, oh, no, well, you can go home again. And now I'm not sure that if a tsunamis came outside of the daylight saving, I don't think I'd go. I'd just climb a tree or something. I don't know. But this verse really made me think, see to it that none of you misses out on the grace of God. And then it follows with these two attitudes. And I thought maybe these two attitudes will tell us that we are or others are missing out on the grace of God, because he raises two things, two kinds of attitude, which may, if I'm honest, look at myself, maybe this will make me miss out on the grace of God. Or is this something in a brother or sister that is stopping them or bringing them to miss out on the grace of God? And he says the first one is bitterness. Bitterness. He says, make sure that no poisonous root of bitterness grows up in you. So that's the earlier verses. Make sure there's no bitter root, no root of bitterness. Now, I have a weed in my garden. It's got a very simple name. It's called dock, D-O-C-K. Dock. Farmers hate it because it sends a root very deep down, and if you don't dig it all out, all the root, every single little bit of the root, that little bit that remains will grow again. And it sends a deep, deep root. It's very hard to get out when it has grown to some considerable size. Dock. And dock is like bitterness. Because when bitterness gets into your heart, it can be very hard to root out. It's very closely linked to a word we use called resentment. I resent what's happening in somebody else. I resent the joy or the blessings that they get, and resentment comes. Where's an example of this in the Bible? Do you remember the name of the sister of Moses? Moses had a brother called Aaron and a sister called Miriam. And Miriam took offense at Moses' wife. He married a woman who wasn't a Jewess, and Miriam didn't like that and used that marriage to criticize Moses. And then a little bit later, Miriam and her brother said to each other, why does God speak to our brother and not direct to us? We're older than he is. Why doesn't God speak to us? And she became bitter about it and resentful because God was speaking through Moses, and God had to judge Miriam. Do you know what actually happened to her? She got leprosy. And they asked Moses to pray for her that she would be healed of this. You see, if you get bitter about something and then you can't forgive, you end up spreading the bitterness to others, contaminating others. And if I let it get a hold in my life, just like Doc gets going in my garden or any garden, well, the writer says this can destroy the work of grace of God in your life. We have to look after each other. We have to look out for each other. The other thing that will stop the grace of God is, as you can see here in verse 16, that you take the things of God lightly. You don't take the things of God seriously in your life. And he gives us an example, the example of Esau. Now, Esau was born with great advantages. Esau was born with the advantage of the blessing of God to Abraham and his father Isaac, and passing on to him as Esau. He had this amazing gift of God's grace as the older brother. But to Esau, they meant nothing, nothing. And it happened like this, that one day when Jacob was cooking a dinner, Jacob stayed much more at home. Esau used to go out on the farm or hunting. And Esau came home one day and he went, and he could smell a pot of red lentil stew. I don't mind red lentils, I think they're okay, but red lentil stew, and he was famished, he was hungry. He said, I'm going to die. And he found Jacob and said, give me some of that red stew. And Jacob was a cunning man, and Jacob says, I'll give you some stew, but you give me the birthright. You give me the birthright, and you can have the stew, you can have the whole pot if you want. And Esau says to him, I'm going to die, brother. I'm going to die. What's the point? What's the worth of my birthright if I'm going to die? Give me the stew. Now, he may have been exaggerating that he was going to die. A lot of young men do. But when he traded his God-given birthright for a bowl of red lentil stew, just to satisfy his hunger, God takes it as very serious. God saw that as very serious. He said Esau despised his birthright. Now, what does that mean? Well, see, God had given promises to Abraham that were in the future. And Esau says, I can't see that future stuff. That's all future. I live for the present, mate. I live for the present. I'm hungry. I can't put up with hunger pains. I need food. And he's saying, you see, all those future promises, you can have them, Jacob. You have the lot. As far as I'm concerned, the stew is worth far more than all those future promises. I'm not prepared to put up with hunger pains, just for a few promises, God-given promises. I want a full stomach now. And if holding on to the promises means that I have to go hungry, give me relief from pain, give me present satisfaction. That's what he did. And he despised God's blessings. And God says to us, look after each other so that you don't become like him, which is godless. He was godless. We have Jerry here, and he's got a wonderful name. His name is Godly, and that's the opposite of godless. How many generations have had the name Godly in your family? Father, grandfather, great-grandfather? It's amazing. Wow. The family name is Godly. Well, Esau was godless. And he says, I don't want these promises. I want now. So how do we not be godless like Esau? How do we prevent ourselves from being godless like Esau? Well, says the writer, we have a choice, and we have to make a choice between following Jesus and taking up his cross, as we've been looking at on Fridays recently, sharing the rejection that Jesus suffered at the cross. And this can lead to far more than hunger pains, I can tell you. To follow Jesus can mean much greater difficulty than hunger. But that's one of the choices, the writer says. Will you follow Christ at this difficult time? Or will you say, no, I can't handle that. I refuse Christ and his cross. I couldn't care less for God's promises in Jesus. I'm not interested in living by faith. I want to have a good time and a full stomach now. And if you want to, you can live on promises, if you like, but I don't want rejection from family, from social group, from the nation, even for Christ's sake. And the writer's saying, there's the choices you've got. There are the choices you've got. And I go, but how do you make the right choice when you're really weak? And these people were really weak. They were going through the mill, as we say in English. They were going through really difficult times of persecution and rejection. And now they're being told that if they follow Christ, it means carrying a cross. And they listen to what the world around them is saying. Their fellow Jews are saying, here's an answer. Come to the law, the law, the law, the law. Get back to the law. Discipline your life. You follow this and you'll get satisfaction from keeping the law of God. There's the answer. Come to Mount Sinai. Mount Sinai is the answer to you. Keep the law. Strive to be perfect. And they're going, we're so weak. How can we do that? And they're saying, but hadn't we been told about the grace of God in Jesus and that we have been saved by the grace of God? And yes, they had. And so how are they going to find victory in their life? How are they going to find this answer? Will it be Mount Zion which is for God, or will it be Mount Sinai, which is the law? And the writer says, here it is. The answer is not back in the law. The answer is not in striving for perfection. The answer is not in doing, going, keeping. The answer is in Jesus. Yes, Sinai was an awesome experience for Israel. They had been at the mountain, and the mountain had been shaking, and they were trembling. God had said, don't touch the mountain. Don't even let an animal touch the mountain. My holy presence is there. And they were saying, oh, we belong to a holy God. But after all, it was a physical mountain. It was a touchable mountain. They shouldn't touch it, but it was a mountain they could touch. It was a physical thing. And the writer's saying, that's gone now. We have the reality now. We have the spiritual reality. We don't need the mountain. We don't come to something we can touch. You've come to a spiritual reality. And you go, well, what have we come to? And the writer says, you haven't come to Mount Sinai again. You haven't come to the law again. This is what you've come to. Look at these things that he talks about. I read through these and it just went on and on and on and on. You've come to Mount Zion. It's the city of God. He's the living God. This is the heavenly Jerusalem. You haven't come to Mount Sinai, which is just a mountain. It's a sign. It was a wonderful experience, but you've come to God's Mount Zion. You say, oh, wow. Then he says, number 2, you've got the whole angelic army to help you. You've come in to know all these angels, and they're rejoicing. When do angels rejoice? When does the Bible say angels rejoice? Do you remember? When a sinner repents. When a person repents before God, the angels are rejoicing. And the writer says, you've come to these angels. They're rejoicing when you repent. Look what he says. Number 3, you become part of the church of the firstborn, whose names are written in heaven. Wow. He said, yes, you belong there. That's what you've come to. That's what God wants for you. You go, oh. And then he says, and you've come to the judge of all. You go, oh, I don't need a judge. I'm weak and I'm sinful. But the judge of all, who judges in righteousness. How does he judge? You see, he's already judged Jesus. He's judged Jesus with all his righteousness for all our sin. All our sin was put on Jesus. And God, the righteous judge, looks on Jesus and is satisfied and allows us to come to him. He's the judge, but he's a judge who has judged our sin. And we can now come to him and worship him. He hasn't finished. He says, you've come to the spirits of justified men and women. He said, think of all those people who went before you, even the ones before the cross. They looked forward in faith. They're the ones that you've joined. They're the party that you've joined. They're the people that are welcoming you. They're the people that are watching on after you. You go, is there more? Yes, there's more. You've come to Jesus. He's the mediator of the new covenant. Jesus is your arrangement for living. He's the central figure in the new covenant, and he's right there to be your strength and your righteousness and your wisdom. Come to Jesus. So the writer is saying, you have come again. You come again to the mountain, come again to the thousands of angels, come again to the church of the firstborn, come again to God, come again to Jesus, the mediator of the covenant. And then he brings one little detail at the very end. He says, you've come to the cleansing blood that speaks of a better story than the blood of Abel. Remember Abel, the younger son or the younger of the 2 brothers of Adam and Eve, and Cain killed Abel because his sacrifice was not accepted by God. And it says Abel's blood cries out for vengeance. Abel's blood says, I must be avenged. There must be judgment because of my blood. But does the blood of Jesus do that? The blood of Jesus cries out for grace to those, because Jesus' blood was shed to pay them. Now, you're not going to pass on all those blessings, are you, says the writer? You're not going to pass up on those wonderful things. You're not going to go back to the law, are you? Now, I can appreciate that being reminded of those blessings meant much more to those Jews than it means to us today. You read those and you go, wow, I'm quite sure what they mean. What do they mean to me? Read them again when you get home. Read those again and say, that's who you come to. That's who God is wanting you to come to. Did they come? Did they come? I really, really hope so. What about us? What about us? Do they encourage you to come nearer to God and come to Jesus? I want to, but then I have this constant reminder of my failures and of my weaknesses and of falling into the sin for the 100th time. And this passage is saying, hey, marvel at the wonder of having Jesus as the mediator of a new covenant between God and you. That beautiful hymn that we sang just before of the second of the two, well, they're both beautiful. That hymn, what a wonderful message. Start to wonder at that, marvel at it, say, oh, yes, this is, you see, that's why we celebrate it in communion. That's why this is such a special time, taking communion together. And we're going to sing a song afterwards, which will say, I am amazed at the grace. I stand amazed in the presence of Jesus, the Nazarene who loved me and gave himself for me. We must never forget his work. So be amazed. Be amazed today when you come up and take communion a little bit later on. Be amazed and think of all those things that you've come to and that Jesus invites you to come again to today. God says, come, 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 come. But as I finish, I have to talk about this unshakable city. You see, they had been severely shaken and they were going through all this hardship. And the blessings that the writer was talking about did possibly look shaky to them. How can this be? And are we going to really get these blessings? And now the writer's saying, God is going to shake the world even more. How could he shake the world more? It's being terribly shaken today. Well, what is happening today is even nothing to what God is going to do in a day to come. He is going to shake the whole world. It was rough. It was going to get rough. It's going to get discouraging. The pressures will be intense. But here is what God has promised. And I want to leave this with you. This is what God has promised us. You, if you're a child of God, he has for you an unshakable city. He has booked his place for you in that unshakable city. Remember Abraham? When Abraham came into the land that God had promised, he said, I'm not even going to build a house. I won't build a single house in this place because my house, my mansion, my place is in heaven, which has got foundations that are unshakable, or eternal foundations. Abraham saw that 4,000 years earlier. And every material thing in this world is going to be shaken and destroyed. And if we haven't got an unshakable city, we have nothing. And the writer says we respond to this by, verse 28, we respond to this by being thankful and so worship God acceptably with reverence and awe. Serving God with thankfulness in the ways which please him, but always with reverence and holy fear. Then you say to me, but what about that last line? What about that bottom line? God is a consuming fire. Why did he put that there? Why does he put that there? Should this fill us with fear? God is going to burn up everything that is not of him. Well, here's something. I didn't invent this. I read this. Fire destroys what it can't purify. Fire destroys what it can't purify, but it purifies what it can't destroy. Fire will destroy everything that it can't be purified, but it will purify everything that can't be destroyed. So we can live through the consuming fire of God because its purpose is to destroy the things that have to be destroyed and purify the things which can never be destroyed. You want to enjoy the city? You need to enjoy the city. You can do so now. Think of those things. Come. We sang the very first one, I Have a Shepherd, one I love so well, because he's inviting you to come and enjoy these blessings. Read those verses again when you get home. Think of those beautiful things. Come to Jesus and come to that blood that was shed by Jesus, which says, no more vengeance. The vengeance has been paid for. I've paid the price. And now you are free before God. What a blessing for us. So think about that unshakable city. Unshakable city. It's yours because of what God has done, and enjoy it. Let us, in a short moment when we come to take communion, let's just be amazed. We'll sing the song now. Stand amazed in the presence. Thank you, Danny and the music team, to lead us.